My name is Farooq Atesh. I started Modernizer about 2 years ago. We are currently a team of 4 volunteers. Paul Iris and I, we're both here tonight. We're actually looking for more volunteers. So if people are interested after this talk, come talk to one of us and we'll chat. This talk is basically about Modernizer, obviously. What it is, why you should use it, what makes it awesome, and a little bit of history behind it. And we're not going to go into too much detail, but there will be some code examples so you get a good feel of like how to use this the best way possible. First, we're going to start with what is Modernizer? Well, the site describes it as an open source JavaScript library that helps you build the next generation of HTML5 and CSS3 powered websites. It doesn't really tell you how it does that, but it's kind of the essence of what this thing does. It's open source. It helps you actually start to take advantage of all these great new features that browsers are adding to HTML5 and or adding to their browser vendors, and all these HTML5, CSS3 features that people want to use. But starting to use these technologies isn't always the easiest thing. So Modernizer makes it easier for you to get started with them and to kind of like figure out how to use them in the best way possible without sacrificing what the experience is going to be like for people using older browsers. So at the heart, Modernizer is a feature detection library. So what we do is we detect, the library detects everything from CSS3 and HTML5 and all the related new technologies. It detects whether the browser that the user is currently using, whether it has native support for each of these features. And then once it has detected these features, it'll report that information back to you so that you as the designer or developer know that, oh, this current user, their browser can do these things, cannot do these things. So we want to do this thing with HTML5 file API, or we want to do something cool with CSS transforms. With Modernizer, you actually know whether or not the browser will be able to do that. And then that means you can either choose to enhance the experience for those people that have that capability in the browser, or you can degrade it for those people who don't and do some kind of fallback, or offer something alternative. The way Modernizer makes this information to you available to you is there's two methods. Well, the first way is it creates this global JavaScript object called Modernizer. And on that object are all the feature tests are listed as properties. So you'll have something like modernizer.css transitions, which when you evaluate it, it will return either true or false based on whether or not the browser has that feature built in native implementation. So if it's true, the browser can do transitions in CSS, you can do some cool stuff there. If it's false, you need to fall back to either like some jQuery animate fallback or something else, or offer something without animation altogether. The other method with which you can use this information is through classes added to the HTML element. Now we recommend that you start in your raw markup with just a class node-js, and then when you do that, Modernizer will load and start doing its feature detection. It replaces that and also adds all these classes, and this is just a small subset of the many classes that will be added depending on what you do. But every time a feature is present in the browser, it'll add the class. If it's not present or the browser doesn't understand it, it'll prefix it with no and a dash. So in this small limited example, you can see that the browser is, it doesn't support touch events. It does support CSS transitions, it does support font face, and it doesn't support 3D transforms. So this allows you to kind of like create different variations of your design based on whether or not these features are available. And you can do that just by creating what is essentially a set of if-else conditions in your CSS. So I'll do a quick example of that. So we have our div. Drop shadows are awesome, and we can zoom in here, and you can kind of see like, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's gorgeous. Beautiful shadow. But what about browsers that don't support box shadow? Well, in that case, we can do that the no box shadow class, and then again our CSS, and then we give it an alternative. We give it a border. You know, it doesn't look quite as nice. It's all like, oh, it's solid, ew. But it's at least something, and that can help when you need to do something subtle like that or something more significant. For instance, you know, in this case, we have some white text on a white background. Well, we can read it because we have this gorgeous text shadow around it. Of course, in a browser without text shadow, that doesn't work very well. And that means, you know, we can do no text shadow. We can change the text color, and then people will be able to still read it. And, you know, but in the browsers that actually support text shadow, you get the nice fancy version. These are just kind of like simple examples, but at the heart, what you can see here is, you know, this makes it makes doing these different experiences, different designs, a lot easier. So as a designer and as a developer, what this means for you is that, you know, you can control and just sort of define different types of experiences or different looks to the website, and know for sure whether or not it's going to work in the browser. And then, you know, if the browser doesn't support this, you can do that, alternatives, and it's actually really easy. That's the two previous examples only had like 4 lines of CSS. Really not that hard. And yeah, that's really kind of the essence of what Modernizer does. You know, making tailored experiences easy. We have so many different browsers to support nowadays. People are using mobile devices of all sorts, all these different desktop browsers, older versions, current versions, future versions, and that makes it really difficult. So, you know, Modernizer makes it actually a lot easier, because you can just say, hey, is this feature present that I want to use? If not, do this other thing. So, you know, why would you really use that beyond what I just kind of like said? You know, easier to build forward compatible experiences. And that's actually a pretty important thing, because what we're doing a lot, and I'll talk more about this in a bit, but what we're doing a lot is kind of like focusing on the current browser landscape. But what we're building are things that people will use beyond today. You know, the sites and applications that we're building right now, people are using it today and tomorrow, not today and in the past. So with Modernizer, whenever a new browser shows up to the market, the site that you built will actually work in that browser just fine. And if it has certain features that, you know, maybe the newer version of Firefox or something, if it has certain features that it didn't have at the time when you built it, it'll actually pick up on those features automatically because you built it the right way using Modernizer. And that's a pretty powerful thing, because even like completely new browsers show up on the market still today. Yesterday, the new Amazon Kindle Fire tablet comes with some other browser. Yeah, sure, it's WebKit based, but it's not exactly the same WebKit as, you know, the WebKit on the iPad, or the WebKit on an Android smartphone, or, you know, the WebKit on the Playbook, which God knows what that is. But the thing is, these are all different browsers, but, you know, whether or not they support certain features is what you actually care about. So with Modernizer and doing this sort of like progressive enhancement based on feature detection, you can actually build forward compatible experiences, and that's a really powerful thing. Because if you're, who here works at like an agency or something like that? Building? Okay, wow, just a very small number. Who here works at like a larger corporation for mostly internal websites or apps? What does everyone else do? Okay, so, well, people have different needs, and they have different environmental constraints based on like the company they work for and the kind of websites or applications they build. And being able to sort of like maintain different versions very easily is actually really helpful, especially if you have certain restrictions where you need to support IE6. But, you know, you may not actually want to or be able to support IE6 with the full extent of the application logic that you're building. So with this, you can just say, hey, IE6, you know, it's going to be supported. We're going to support the basic functionality, the bare minimum, and then we're going to progressively enhance it for everyone who is able to use a newer browser. And then, you know, those people will get a richer experience, a little nicer design, you know, more functionality because their browser's capable of it. But you don't have to actually worry and deal with like all this sort of nasty hacking around IE and its limitations and missing features. So you can just say, hey, it's going to work, but it's going to be minimal. And then better browsers get better experiences. On the flip side, you can be, if you're focusing on really cutting-edge applications or websites, you can be like, hey, we have this amazing thing we want to build, and you kind of need like a pretty recent version of Chrome or Safari or Firefox, and IE9 is like barely cutting it. It's like, that's okay, you can do that, and then just gracefully degrade and make sure that everything that is essential to, all the essential content is still there, all the essential functionality is still there. Make sure that it's accessible to people with older browsers, but it'll just not be as awesome. It'll be less exciting, but it's still accessible and still works. So all these kind of like forward compatible experiences are really easy. This whole thing is also actually better for the web. The more you use the HTML5, CSS3, all these new features that browser vendors are putting into their browsers, the more kind of like bugs you discover, the more kind of like issues you want to get fixed, or changes to the feature implementation you may want to request. And that helps the browser vendors make their browser better, more robust, make it faster, make it perform better for the users. That means the users are going to get a better experience because their browser is getting better as a result, and that makes the overall web just a better place for everyone. So it's actually really helpful for, at the first level, the browser vendors, when you start using all these new technologies. Second level, the users, and third, just the web itself. And the third reason, pink is the new hotness. I think that's a very compelling argument. So those are kind of like the whys behind why you should use Modernizer. It's also the whys behind why I kind of started it and why we've been developing it for 2 years now. But there's another one, which was, we want to put an end to user agent sniffing. And who here has ever used like a really modern browser, gone to a website, and get this sort of like error message screen saying, hey, you need to upgrade to Firefox 4. Or, you need to upgrade to IE7. Or that, yeah. So I've seen this happen over and over again so many times, still like today. And this is just really bad because user agent sniffing is very error prone. There are so many different user agents to work with. And it's really difficult to actually be accurate with it because user agents lie a lot. This is like a browser user agent string. And if you look closely, you can see kind of like 4 different things in there, 2 different browsers, 4 different rendering engines. It's really not that easy to work with. And it has bitten people in the ass a lot over the past 10 years. It's caused a lot of issues on the web and for a lot of corporations and a lot of agencies, because keeping up with this sort of model, this approach, it doesn't scale. It really doesn't scale towards all these new browsers that are coming out, these new devices and these new aspect ratios and everything. And this has caused a lot of trouble and like hardship on the web because it's actually hurt the web's progress over the past 10 years, especially in the earlier years. So Modernize was also kind of devised to offer a really great alternative, something that's actually better than doing forking of code through UA sniffing and all that. And the whole better aspect is that features are much more reliable to detect for, and they're actually what you want to detect for. Because as a developer or a designer, you really shouldn't care whether or not the user is using Chrome or Safari or Firefox or IE or whatever. What you care about is, are they able to do this thing that I want to do, or see this thing that I want to show them? So yeah, the whole UA sniffing, kind of want to bring an end to that, get people on the feature detection bandwagon, focus on other things like speed and performance. So getting started with Modernizer, well, there are 2 versions of the JavaScript library. There's the development version. This is uncompressed, has all the tests in it, and it's like over 40 tests already. It's also a really good resource for general learning of HTML5 and CSS3 things. It's also a good thing. We've put the development version on Content Delivery Network, so if you're working on some kind of limited control case where you cannot really control all the markup or anything like that, these are useful resources for you to work with. But it's really for development type purposes. When you go into production and you want to use Modernizer in a production environment, we actually make you do a custom build where you only include just the test that you need. So if you only need CSS transitions, only include that test. If you need only like a small handful, only include those. And then you make your own compressed production build, which is pretty unique to your own scenario, to your own needs. And it's something that we encourage you to host yourself. There are a couple there's one main thing that Modernizer doesn't do. And that's make older browsers support these new features from HTML5 and CSS3. With two exceptions. Built in is the HTML5 shiv, or IE print protector. And this is important for anyone who wants to use the new elements, the new semantic elements from HTML5. So if you want to use like article and header and footer and H group and all these like great new semantic elements, that's cool, go ahead, but Internet Explorer has no idea what you're talking about. It doesn't recognize these elements because they're not in HTML4, and it just goes like, I don't know, this is something, I see it, but I don't understand it. The problem is IE will create a broken document object model from it. So your DOM will actually be different than how you actually structured your markup, and that's going to cause problems with styling and JavaScript. So through this little thing that Remy Sharp wrote, it's just a small JavaScript loop that goes through all these new elements from HTML5 and sort of like creates them in node space for IE, and then IE suddenly understands these elements. And it's like, oh, hey, a header, I get that, cool. So with this, you can actually start using the HTML5 semantic elements and still be able to style and work with them in IE as well. And the IE print protector also allows you to still print them, which is still useful. The other thing is, this is something only available in custom builds, and that's respond.js. And respond.js is a fast and lightweight polyfill for min-max width CSS3 media queries, mainly for IE6 through 8, but also any other browser that actually doesn't support them yet. So this is just a small little JavaScript library that helps you take advantage of media queries to provide different sets of styles to different environments, primarily based on like aspect ratio and the width of the screen. So what's great about that is that it allows you to start doing responsive web design in every browser, including like IE6 and ever since. Who here has not heard of responsive web design? Cool, everyone's heard of it. Still, quick overview. It's a content-first, design-oriented technique. It focuses you. It asks you to like really focus on starting sort of with the mobile-first approach, which you must have heard of as well. With content first, you really focus on is this content necessary for the user on whether or not they're on a mobile device or like a tablet or whether they're on a desktop. And if not, then maybe you should reconsider adding it. So it really simplifies every page kind of down to what everyone needs at all times. It's a technique about fluid grids and images so that you can create completely adaptive layouts. And adaptive layouts really kind of like, they take the same markup, the same web page, and make it work no matter what the device or screen size the user is using. So whether or not they're on a smartphone or a tablet or a desktop browser or like a really big screen, it'll still work, and you can still make sure that their layout is, makes sense to them, is a really great experience. A recently launched example of this is the Boston Globe. It's a brand new website, really fantastic, full of responsive, like a completely responsive design, a really large website too, lots of content. So I really encourage you to check it out and learn a lot from their code, because it's a really great resource just as for web developers. But this talk is not about responsive web design, so moving on. Using Modernizer the right way. There are a couple of general principles to keep in mind for that. The first thing is sort of a philosophical one, where you want to design and build for the browser of the future. And what I mean by that is, we typically look at the browser landscape of today. You know how much market share does IE9 have, IE8, IE7, Firefox 7, 6, 5, 4, Chrome, and that's actually really unhelpful, because what you really want to do when you're building or designing and building these new websites or applications is you want to design them for this sort of hypothetical browser that will come out about 2 years from now. Because 2 years, 3 years, 2 years is a really long time in our landscape. And there's a lot of things that change. And if you're focusing on just what's going on right now, you're going to sort of miss out on the market share changes that will happen over the next couple of years. The big thing about that is, everyone that has an older browser right now, not the latest version, not the latest and greatest of any browser, at some point they're going to upgrade, whether it's through a hardware upgrade or just a software upgrade, operating system, whatever. They almost never, virtually never downgrade their browsers. People don't go from, Firefox 6 is really, nice and all, but I prefer 3.5. It doesn't happen. So people always get better browsers. So no matter what your current audience is for your website or application right now, that audience is only going to get better browsers over the next month, over the next 6 months, over the next year, and so forth. So every time you focus more on the people using the oldest browsers right now, you're actually preventing yourself from focusing on what they will be using sometime in the near future. And especially when it comes to feature detection, whatever new version or new browser that they will have a number of months from now, it'll have more features, more capabilities. It'll be better. And if you focus too much on what they have right now, you're not going to offer them the best experience you could have given them when they upgrade their browser next. The other ways, the other principle, or second principle, is you want to really focus on feature detection based on whether or not something is missing or is present. So it's kind of like the progressive enhancement, graceful degradation trade-off there, where you may have these features, you have this design for certain features, and the browser just doesn't have support for border radius or something like that. Then we'll do some kind of fallback for that, or just don't care. But at least you're able to do both, or whichever you want to do. The same was the earlier example that I gave, where maybe you're building some intranet app or whatever, and you need to still support IE6 or IE7, and you really don't want to, but you have to. It happens. Then you can just say, hey, you know what? IE7 is going to have this level of support. It's going to, the basic functionality is going to be there. The content is going to be accessible, but they're not going to have all the bells and whistles. And then you detect features and see if they're present, and then you just enhance it for those people using a browser that can. It also is something that encourages you to focus really on the speed and performance of your site or your application, because that's a really big thing. People don't like waiting, especially on the web, even more so on mobile, which doesn't actually make sense a lot, but yeah, people really don't like waiting with their phones. And by focusing on really lean code and the best kind of experience possible for them using native implementations being much faster than these JavaScript fallbacks that you can offer, that allows you to create a much better, faster experience for people. And speed and performance are really much more important than visual consistency. over the past like 15 years of the web, most of that time we've sort of dealt with trying to make everything look pixel perfect across every browser, but that is really like, we really need to stop with that, because we're never going to actually do that. There's always going to be differences between certain browsers, certain type rendering engines, operating systems that will affect it somehow. And it's really not worth spending a whole lot of time on that, because people do not go to your website and go, oh, that looks great. I wonder what it looks like in this other browser. They don't do that. They go and use it. So, but if it's really slow because you spend a lot of time and resources on making like everything pixel perfect and making sure that these rounded corners work in IE6, then if it's really slow and takes a minute for them to go to the next page, then they're going to give up and close the tab or the browser. So these are kind of like main principles behind using Modernizer really the right way. And the first one is something that I kind of want to visualize here, where we tend to focus on the past 3 years, like this era between the present and these browsers that people have been using for the past 3 years. But 3 years is a really long time. Who remembers which browser came out 3 years ago? There's a little browser called Chrome. No one had ever heard of it. And then Google came out and it's like, hey, here's a browser. And now that same browser has 23% market share worldwide. And that's really significant in just 3 years. So where's it going to be in the next 3 years, right? We have no idea. Maybe Chrome will continue its upward slope and be somewhere around like 50, 55, maybe 60%. Maybe some other browser is going to hit the market. Maybe the Kindle Fire is going to like be super successful and millions of people are going to use that to browse the web with. Thing is, you don't know. But what you do know is which features are they going to have in that browser or not. And we really should focus on the browsers, or the browser landscape as it will be over the next 3 years. Because that's also kind of the time span in which websites get refreshed, or applications. Some really big websites take more than 6 months to develop in the first place. So what happens when you start developing and you focus on the present and the past, and you're already going to be 6 months further down the road when you actually ship it, well, then you're really focusing on a browser landscape that has long come behind us. So designing for the browser, or design really for the browser of the future, it's all about like feature detection makes it possible to do this, because if you're doing feature detection and you're progressively enhancing, it doesn't matter like which browser is coming out 2 years from now. It'll still report whether or not it supports that feature. And if it does, your code will automatically take the right path and give this awesome experience. Right, so this is the whole like progressive enhancement versus graceful degradation. Actually already went over that. There's one more, and that's called regressive enhancement. And it's kind of it's sort of in between the two, with a like little path to the side. I like to sort of think of it as going mega responsive, and that's it makes use of this awesome little library called YepNope, and we've actually incorporated YepNope as part of Modernize as well. And the creator, Alex Sexton, is one of the 4 volunteers on the team, on the Modernizer team. And what this does is it's conditional dynamic resource loading, and it means something cool like this, where you use it, you test for a feature, in this case geolocation. If the browser says, yeah, I support geolocation, it's awesome. Then you load geo.js, little tiny bit of JavaScript that takes advantage of the native implementation of geolocation. If it doesn't, you can say, hey, load this polyfill. And then with this polyfill, it's actually going to be, you're going to simulate the whole geolocation API so that you can still kind of offer the same result. It won't be as effective, but it's pretty close. Quick note on a polyfill. A polyfill is a small JavaScript library to retrofit new functionality into older browsers. So there's lots of them out there. And it's really about, the previous example is a great example where, if the browser doesn't support geolocation, there's this fallback you can insert, and then it'll sort of support geolocation. A note on them is that they do tend to create an overhead in processing. So sometimes you may actually want to choose not to use polyfills for putting older functionality into older browsers, because that will actually affect the performance of those older browsers a lot more. So use with caution. Another good example of this sort of regressive enhancement thing is this example with the HTML5 forms polyfill, which is done by Ryan Seddon, who, another awesome library that works with Modernizer, and we decided to put him on the team. So if you want to be part of the Modernizer team, just create something that works really well with it. It's really awesome, and then we'll just ask you to come and join the team. That's a really great way to do it. So this example, we'll quickly go through it. It tests for Modernizer the input types email, some other input type or input attributes, and then if the browser doesn't have all of these, it goes like, oh nope, load this HTML5 forms polyfill, and then that polyfill will actually sort of use JavaScript to retrofit the new HTML5 forms functionality into the browser, which is a really great way of doing it, because what this also means is that you're not going to load these resources for people that already, whose browsers already understand these things. And you can take that to a way more complicated example, something that won't fit on the slide, but where you can really do all these various tests and go okay, well, the browser supports these things, load these resources, doesn't support that, load these resources. The Modernizer.com website itself is actually doing some of that, where we really try and load only the resources for only the current environment that we need, and ignore all the rest. To close a little bit of advanced debate, well, sort of. There's a lot of ongoing talk, especially in the past year, about native versus web, and do we want to build applications on the web, and is it as good as native? And I kind of like to think that Modernizer plays a pretty helpful role in this, especially for those people who here does native development as well. Yeah, so a handful. So the thing about that is there's a lot of stuff we can do in browsers. It's not as fast, it's not as great perhaps as what we can do in native platforms. But the thing that I like the web for maybe the most is that it allows us to actually deliver content to people using devices going back all the way to 92, from pre-actual web era. They can still sort of understand these technologies that we're using. And that's kind of there's these benefits to native, it's great, baselines, you can just say, hey, upgrade to the latest operating system, but that shuts people out. It makes it completely inaccessible for these people that either cannot or won't upgrade or switch to your platform or whatever. Sometimes it shuts them out for a long time. And on the early days of the web, we're kind of behaving the same way, where, oh, you need to get the latest version of Internet Explorer to get this, understand this website. And then the whole web standards movement kind of changed that. And nowadays, we can actually do this thing, especially with Modernizer, where we offer the most amazing experience that we can think of, that we can design, and that we can build to all the people that actually are using a browser capable of rendering and understanding it. And then we can go on to sort of make sure that the content is still available and accessible to people using older browsers, and that all the bare essentials will stay there no matter how old their browser is. And that's actually a really powerful thing, because that gives us the largest possible audience in the world to sell our content to, or our product. And the downside is, of course, more work up front to do it right, but it's actually, it turns out it's going to be much less work to maintain it over time. So it's actually a pretty valuable proposition. And that's kind of it. We've left in a good amount of time for questions, because it's pretty usually the case. So thanks very much. We have some prizes as well. So thanks.